and welcome to the podcast where friends discuss environmental policies from around the planet. Hey guys, welcome back to the Planet Policy Pals. We are kicking off Series 3, What Happens When. I'm Ala, and I'm joined here by Ajwa. Hello, girl.
Hey girl, what's up?
Not much. It is 1 a.m., but I am wide awake and happy.
Happy is a stretch, but sure.
It is a stretch. I'm close to well, let's not talk about what the Niners did to me tonight. Let's just
I was gonna say, are you sure you're happy?
I'm as happy as I'm gonna get. I'm just gonna focus on, I don't know what I'm focusing on, but the Rams must lose the Super Bowl. That's all I know.
No, listen. The Chiefs lost to Bengals.
I don't care.
The Rams must beat the Bengals for me to be happy, okay? I am sorry.
I'm not going to support division rivals because Mahomes lost. Sucks to suck, okay? That's his thing, his problem.
Nah, man, that man deserved the Super Bowl, okay? But I don't know what happened to him in the second half. It's like I was surprised. We were up 21-3. 21-3.
Joey
How
B,
did we
baby.
lose?
Joey B, baby.
Joey B. Mad respect for that guy, dude.
Masai said he's like a hot Macaulay Culkin.
I can totally see it.
Yeah. So just a reminder, you guys, please review us. You know, we asked last episode, and I guess you guys didn't hear me. Please rate us on Spotify and review us. I don't know. Could you guys give us some reviews? We're begging. And of course, check us out on Twitter at Planet Policy Pal, Instagram, Planet Policy Pals, and our Facebook page. And when we finally have enough people on our social media, maybe we'll make like a discussion group on Facebook or something. So in this episode, we're going to talk about polar ice caps melting, and, you know, that topic can cover like hundreds of dissertations. There's thousands of papers on it, but we want to focus on the implications of melting and the Earth's crust and permafrost. And next week, we'll bring you some more stuff about polar ice caps. We have a lot to cover, so we're not going to spend as much time on environmental news, but we still want to keep you guys updated about what's going on in that space. And of course, links in the show notes. So this is really recent news, very popular, really recent news. The consultancy firm McKinsey says total global spending by governments, businesses, and individuals on energy and land use systems will need to rise by $3.5 trillion a year, every year, if we are to have any chance of getting to net zero in 2050. Now, that's a 60% increase on today's level of investments, and it's equal to about half of global corporate profits and a quarter of world tax revenue. Although this sounds scary when you first hear it, the thing we have to keep in mind is the cost of not transitioning is far more. The longer we wait, the more expensive it gets. And if we do nothing, we could wipe out 18% of global GDP, which is about $13.6 trillion a year in dollars. All this is in dollars for right now. That being said, Ajwa, what industries do you think will be hardest hit? And how do you think governments are going to use this information to drive climate policy?
Well, obviously, when you talk about net zero, we know which industries are being hit. And you know they're going to hit back, girl. The oil industry. The high emission industries, right? There would be changes to what people are eating. So obviously the meat industry is going to take a hit. Because of these rising energy bills, people may not be so much on board, I feel. Right? And the governments will really need to be smart about this and kind of like take more of the brunt and put the least amount on their people, because otherwise they're not going to get the support that they're looking for. You know, Trump was able to bring back the coal miners for a fucking reason.
That is true.
Just going to put that out there.
I think it's going to be all about messaging. You know what I mean? It's really just about the message that they're sending, how they're doing it, and the investments that we're willing to make. Because if we don't invest now, guys, as we're about to show you in this episode, we are going to be paying for that shit very soon. Mm-hmm. Getting into polar ice caps, we've been talking about climate change and the ice melting for a long time, emissions and all of that, since like the late 1800s. But Measurements since the 1950s indicate that the amount of sea ice in the Arctic has been slowly declining. Not so slow anymore, but you know. So the Arctic is projected to have no summer ice cover by the middle of the century, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. During the International Polar Year, which was actually 2 years long, from 2007 to 2008, scientists documented numerous impacts of climate change on polar regions. And the impacts included things like melting ice, thawing permafrost, and changes in the ecosystem. They also found, which was very important, that the changes were most pronounced in the Arctic. Ongoing ice loss in West Antarctica, though, has increased over the past few decades. So, they found that this ice loss in the region is caused by ocean-driven melt, for the most part, and that the varying winds in the region cause transition between relatively warm and cool ocean conditions around key glaciers.
Okay, well, the Antarctica and the Arctic regions, they're like ice sheets, right? Not glaciers?
Yeah, they are.
What's the difference?
Like glaciers, ice sheets form through the accumulation of snowfall. And it really happens when you have more snowfall than you have snow melting. Over thousands of years, the layers of snows will build up, and they actually form a flowing sheet of ice that's thousands of feet thick and can be tens to thousands of miles across. As it thickens, the increase of height and snow and ice cause the ice sheet to deform and begin to flow. Now, the key thing is that unlike a glacier, which generally flows in one direction, an ice sheet will flow outwards in all directions from the center. And if an ice field covers more than 50,000 square kilometers, which is about 20,000 square miles, then we say it's an ice sheet. The two major ice sheets on Earth today cover most of Greenland, that's the Arctic area, and Antarctica. So during the last ice age, ice sheets also covered much of North America and Scandinavia, but clearly they're gone.
Clearly.
Clearly. So the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets are roughly 3,000 to 4,000 meters high at the summits. That's about 10 to 13,000 feet. While the West Antarctic and the Antarctic Peninsula ice sheets are about 2,500 meters high. That's about 8,200 feet high. So even though Antarctica is not as high, it just covers a larger space. It's longer. An important thing to know about ice sheets is that they flow outwards from their dome-like centers. They're thicker in the middle, and then they push ice outward until they encounter the ocean or where climate is warm enough to melt the ice faster than the combined flow rate of the glacier and winter snowfall. So when the summer surface melt exceeds the snowfall, then the older layers within the ice sheet are exposed, which you don't want. Because the ice sheet becomes thin, the melted water runs off the surface of the ice, and the ice sheet may terminate on land. However, in much of Greenland and Antarctica, ice flow terminates at the ocean, because there's ocean. And that's when we have what we call tidewater glaciers, which aren't fully afloat, or what we call an ice shelf, which is fully floating thick permanent ice above the ocean. The thing with these areas, because they terminate in the ocean and not the land, is that they're super sensitive to the ocean conditions and what we call ice fracturing.
So why is it so sensitive?
The reason is because areas with some ocean heat can rapidly melt the floating ice from the underside. So you're not talking about it just melting from emissions above, but it starts to thin and it becomes weaker. And then you also have the stress from the ice flowing over bedrock or around islands, and you have more fracturing. And that's what leads to what we call iceberg calving. So these are not things that you want. There are actually 4 ways that ice in the ice sheet may be lost. There's ablation, which is that evaporation on the top. There's the surface melt from, the ice sheet, like we said, flowing. There's calving, where it comes in contact with the ocean. And then there's melting from contact with the ocean. Calving and melting are 2 different things. So mass gain, which we want but aren't really having much of, is mostly by snowfall. But in a few areas, sometimes rainfall on the snow can add a small fraction to the mass inputs. Although 90% of our ice sheet is in Antarctica, the other 10% is still quite a lot. And over the past 30 years, the oldest and thickest ice in the Arctic has declined by 95%, which is insane.
Yeah, that's how Arctic monkeys were born, guys.
Oh my God, please. But no, the Arctic and Antarctica are the world's refrigerators, you know what I mean? So since they're covered in white snow and ice, they reflect heat back into space. They balance out other parts of the world that absorb heat, like at the equator, the tropics. When you have less ice, this isn't hard to figure out, you're going to have less reflected heat, which means more intense heat waves worldwide.
Well, I mean, we know that melting means more extreme winters, like, as the polar jet stream, which is a high pressure wind that circles the Arctic region, is destabilized by warmer air. It can dip south, which brings the bitter cold with it. What are some of the other problems that we face regarding this?
Well, yeah, that's true. And we have even more problems, like you said, including, of course, temperature and weather fluctuations from this extreme winds, loss in biodiversity, which is really important, guys. Ocean levels rising, and loss of land and loss of food. Because if you don't have land and you're losing biodiversity, you're going to lose your food. The two big things we're going to focus on in this episode, though, are the changes to the Earth's crust and the loss of permafrost. Arctic ice and permafrost, which is basically just permanently frozen ice, store large amounts of methane and other greenhouse gases. They thaw, you release those greenhouse gases. You don't want that. And then another thing that we're going to focus on is what I said about the Earth's crust. It happens, but it doesn't come up a lot in popular culture when people talk about ice sheets melting. We tend to focus on ocean level rises, which we will next episode. Scientists have known for a long time that large glaciers and ice sheets melting can warp the Earth's crust. But what we are now learning is that the effects can stretch for thousands of miles beyond just that area. And this is thanks to a new study by a lady called Dr. Sophie Coulson, who just got her PhD from Harvard last year, published this amazing research. And she's a postdoctoral fellow at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, actually.
Go girl.
I know, she's killing it. So Ajwa, tell us a little bit about this permafrost situation.
Okay, so like you said, permafrost is basically just permanently frozen ground. So when we have plants and animals die, the microbes that decompose when they die, their bodies release carbon dioxide, methane, and a bunch of other global warming gases into the air. Now, a deep freeze effectively hits the pause button on that process, and it preserves organisms and obviously the gases that they would otherwise just emit into the air. Now, all of this is now trapped underground. When this frozen soil now thaws, the microbial decomposition of these organic materials and the release of these greenhouse gases, obviously it starts completely like it's new. Now, in the Arctic and the Antarctica, they are packed with many thousands of years of life, right? There's humans that have lived there, mammoths, just a lot of life. And permafrost is one of Earth's greatest stores of global warming gases. Indeed, actually, permafrost in the Arctic, it is alone estimated to hold nearly twice as much carbon as exists in the atmosphere now, as well as sizable amount of methane.
Girl, that's a lot.
Yeah, if all that comes out, we're doomed.
We are.
But the problem actually doesn't end there, right? As this permafrost keeps thawing and it dumps more of its massive supply of greenhouse gases into the air, it's obviously going to warm the climate even further, which is going to melt even more of this permafrost, which is going to emit even more carbon and methane, and it's just going to be an unstoppable feedback loop that will be triggered, and it's just doomsday.
It's crazy because something like that could ultimately turn the Arctic from a carbon sink that absorbs emissions to a carbon source, which is insane. Like those mangroves we discussed in episode 27. Go listen, guys. However, carbon and methane aren't the only pollutants trapped in permafrost. So what else do we got?
Okay, so there was a recent study that found that Arctic permafrost is actually a massive repository of natural mercury, which is, we all know, a potent neurotoxin.
Yeah.
And it is estimated that some 15 million gallons of mercury, or nearly basically twice the amount of mercury which is found in the ocean, atmosphere, and all other soils combined, are right now locked in permafrost soils. Now, once this is released, this mercury can spread through water or air into ecosystems and just potentially even into food supplies and wreak havoc. Also, as the ice melts, polar regions like Russia, Alaska, Canada, they would have a ton of crumbling infrastructure because of all this thawing permafrost. Now, you have to remember, some of this land has been frozen for thousands of years, so they just kind of built over it.
Yeah, I don't think we talk about the infrastructure implications of permafrost melting enough. It's a real big thing.
We don't talk about any infrastructure enough, clearly. Otherwise, we wouldn't have Biden running the show right now.
Wow, the shade, you guys. So speaking of the surface level, the reason we don't want the Earth's crust to change is due to ice loss. There's multiple reasons, but let me give you guys a little geoscience lesson that nobody asked for. The trillions of tons of ice locked in ice sheets weighs heavily on bedrock underneath it. As the ice grows and shrinks over geological time, the earth is compressed by the weight, or it springs back when it melts. So you have to think of it like a cushion that you're pushing. And what happens, you push your hand or the ice is pushing down, and then when it springs back up, you're going to have more ocean moving around, and this is affecting sea level rise, obviously. But the other thing is that one of the Earth's layers is mantle, right? After the outer crust, we have the mantle. That's where we have like magma and things like that. It's not solid. We tend to think of the Earth as solid, and I guess what we're standing on is solid, but mantle is a viscous liquid. And as the pressure from ice sheets on the crust above lifts, the mantle can flow, and this will increase and cause further movement on the outer crust.
Okay, I'm not trying to be sarcastic because I know nobody asked for this geoscience, but like, why do we care about this?
First of all, guys, geoscience is important. Okay, the work I do right now is geotechnical. So yeah. But the reason it's important is because the retreat of a glacier can reduce stress loads on Earth's crust underneath. As the movement of the subsurface magma increases, you can get things like more volcanic activity. And of course, erupting volcanoes hasten climate change. People always say when you talk about climate change, they're like, I mean, we still have volcanoes and stuff, right? That's out of our control. Apparently it's not, guys, because this can lead to that. In fact, a recent study in the journal Geology on volcanic activity in Iceland, they found that between 4,500 to 5,500 years ago, when the Earth was way cooler than it is today, there was a link between what we call deglaciation, it's just loss of glaciers, and increased volcanic activity. Conversely, when glacial cover increased, eruptions declined. So there is that. Another thing which does need more study is that there's a smaller seismic activity that causes low-scale earthquakes as a result of these ice sheets and glaciers melting. So it's a really small link now, but you can't imagine that, especially in those areas you talked of, like the US, Russia, Canada, especially Alaska, as the permafrost is melting in those areas, we could see increased earthquake activity. But hopefully that activity stays closer to the glaciers and ice sheets and doesn't spread. We'll see, though.
Yeah, we will. Let's hope that it actually... I would not want to be a resident of Tonga listening to this.
Girl, 100%.
Yeah, it's so sad what happened there. And the fact that I know we keep thinking that this is out of our control. We couldn't have done anything. Clearly, we could have.
We definitely could have, especially with that oil spill. The one we posted on social media? Easily avoided. But anyway, speaking of things that governments can do but choose not to, let's talk about the policies that we use to fix these problems.
Okay, so we know that Antarctica and Arctic are like two different regions, right? So Arctic is a region of different governments because of different countries that exist there. And obviously, so that means different policies that are adopted around the region. And some of them do call for cooperation between the countries so that they can create a more cohesive environmental protection plan, but it's not always, the best.
Yeah.
Antarctica, on the other hand, has been more protected globally because of its protected status. They have like this Antarctic Treaty system, which is like a whole system of complex arrangements that are basically just made for the purpose of regulating relations among states in the Antarctic.
Oh, good.
They have this Antarctic Treaty consultative meeting, which is held annually. And during each of these, they have this meeting for the Committee of Environmental Protection. There's a scientific committee on Antarctic research, which actually provides independent and objective scientific advice in a variety of fields. And it is particularly, of course, on environmental and conservation matters.
Before this episode, I didn't know a lot about the Antarctic Treaty System, to be honest with you. I didn't even know what it was called. I just knew something existed. So I'm really interested to learn how they work.
Same. I thought it was just something so that, they can exchange just scientific data.
Yeah.
But it's actually a lot more than that. Like the committee, they are guided by this 5-year work plan. So their major focus is their management of risks that is associated with species that are not native to Antarctica. They are managing environmental impacts of tourism and other non-governmental activities. They're understanding and responding to the environmental consequences of climate change in the Antarctic region, and also try to improve the effectiveness of protected area management and enhancing the protected area system.
So what you're telling me is that they do more than the IPCC?
Actually, yeah. Yes, girl. Because when I was looking up their failings as opposed to IPCC failings, trust me, there's a lot more literature on IPCC failings. Now, I don't know if they're just more famous, but yeah, no, they don't get a lot of shit because they have helped like develop management tools. Like they have the environmental impact assessment, or like the conservation of flora and fauna. They have environmental monitoring, marine pollution, protected species, like a bunch of stuff that they do.
Oh.
And they also like engage in these year-round task-oriented activities, which manages a protected area and handles a climate change response. It also organizes workshops, by the way, as needed. And like since its first meeting, like the workload and the diversity of issues, they have like increased substantially. So at the end of these annual meetings, they provide a report of recommendations to the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting. And this advice actually has led to adoption of numerous measures regulating human activity in Antarctica. So they actually have done work.
That's amazing. I really love hearing this. But we also know, at least this is the part I know, Antarctica has a lot of stuff we could tap into.
Don't tell them, girl! Don't tell them!
Not that we should, but we could. I mean, there's tons of fishing stocks. There's the bioprospecting opportunities. Of course, the climate science analysis, people are already doing that. But most importantly, guys, Antarctica has a lot of hydrocarbon with potential reserves of between 300 and 500 billion tons of natural gas on the continent and potentially 135 billion tons of oil in the Southern Ocean. I mean, that's money right there. Is there a chance that we're going to see people go after that money?
All I want you to sit with yourself for a second and think, is there a chance? What do you think? Of course there is. 100%. Here's the fun part, right? Like Article 1 of the Antarctic Treaty, it declares that use of Antarctica is reserved for scientific observation and investigation, strictly for peaceful purposes, right?
Okay.
However, this article is under siege.
Of course.
Despite the treaty, actually, like it suspends the claims of the 7 original claimants, which were Argentina, Australia, Chile, France, New Zealand, Norway, and the UK, the United States, and the then Soviet Union, as an additional non-claimant original signatories. They exercise their right under the treaty to stake a claim at a later stage.
So what you're saying is like basically the treaty froze issue of territorial sovereignty, but it could come up again. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And so, the 90th anniversary of this treaty is coming up in 2049. It will follow a 2048 review milestone that they set for its ban on mining under the Madrid Protocol, which kind of supported the treaty. And although it's like still some years away, it is right now that all these great powers, they're kind of like refocusing their attention on achieving like some sort of long-term strategic objectives by alternative means. Now, whatever the fuck that means. Now, what could change between now and 2048 review?
A lot.
As stakeholders with voting rights on continental governance, the consultative parties to the treaty might decide whether they want to keep its environmental protocol and continue this prohibition on mining and militarization, or they might not, because currently China's failure to comply with the Antarctic inspection requirement, it kind of weakens the treaty's original intent.
Of course.
And this poor compliance that is encouraging militarization below the detection threshold.
What? Militarization in the... I don't even understand human beings anymore.
Yeah, China was like, we are just being kept away from global leadership and we want leadership in this region. Like, they just want to westernize it. Well, I mean, to be fair, they do try to westernize everything. Like, they just think that white people have more rights to this world. But I'm sorry, no, China's militarization is not the answer.
It's unnecessary. Just leave Antarctica alone. The polar bears are already struggling.
Like, you had the rest of the world. You did whatever you wanted. Like, just please let them be.
That's crazy. So what are the implications?
Dude, they would be stark, right? Like, if competition within US and then there's China and then Australia will obviously escalate also. Because they all will increase their military presence because, US and China, it's constantly a dick measuring contest between them.
Yeah. 100%.
Like right now, Australia is really trying to maintain control of Antarctica, and personally, I do support them. Because here this, between 1982 and 1988, there were like a set of tough environmental protection measures that was set out under the Convention on the Regulation of Antarctic Mineral Resource Activities, which was also CRAMRA. Now, under this convention, mining could take place if all parties agreed that there was no risk to the environment. You know, it's not hard to get parties to agree there's no risk to the environment. They think offshore drilling doesn't have a risk to the environment, please.
Yeah.
Now, the aim of this convention was to basically have a framework in place in the advance of any future mining.
No.
However, in 1989, France and Australia refused to sign the convention, like saying they were just like, no mining should ever be allowed to take place in Antarctica, period. Just, no, we're not going to sign it. And I'm like, yes. So we want Australia to get, yep. Good for them, right?
Freaking good for them. Look, I have to say, Australia has a lot of their own issues, but on the environmental side of things, like they put their foot down. Their ocean policies, their mangrove policies, and now this, you go Australia. We have people who listen to us from Australia. You guys are doing fantastic in this regard. Some other things you can work on.
But no, environmentally, the world needs to follow your footsteps.
Yeah. So speaking of the things that could happen in the future, I mean, we've already said a lot of stuff that could happen, but just to recap for the people that need to hear it again, I don't even know if those are the people who listen. Anyway, think about this, right? To accurately observe tectonic motions and earthquake activity, you need to be able to separate that motion out from modern day ice mass loss. But if the implications of a super large ice sheet being lost in one area is farther than we think, then the measurements and calculations that you're using to predict earthquake activity are off. So it's not just that you could have more earthquakes, it's that now you can't even predict them as well as you used to. And then of course, there's the fact that this rebounding of the crust is changing the slope of bedrock underneath the ice sheet. That affects ice dynamics, that affects flow, and that could hasten our already rising sea levels. Another thing is, while both the Arctic and Antarctic are experiencing rising temperatures, thinning glaciers, disturbed ecosystems, you name it, they're experiencing it. What scientists have found is that the changes are sweeping the northern region faster. That's not good for multiple reasons. When we lose ice summers in the northern hemisphere, what will follow is even harsher weather conditions, with droughts, floods, and heat waves worsening. And I mean, I live in Texas, but you know, the northern hemisphere still includes the US and Canada. And I'm saying you should still carry it even if you're not being directly affected, because eventually it gets to you. Another thing is, although Antarctica does not have a lot of habitation, it is surrounded by a huge ocean. So some of that heat can be trapped by the ocean, as can the emissions. However, the Arctic does not have that luxury. And as permafrost worsens, greenhouse gases are released, they're not sequestered, and there's just not enough ocean to suck up the heat. There's people who live close to the Arctic, you guys. The estimates on how much carbon and methane will be released by thawing of permafrost, it varies. So we don't know how much it will be. It's a lot right now. So like Audra said, we could also see the return of ancient long-gone diseases thanks to the microbes and the bacteria being released. And I'm telling you right now, after what we went through in COVID, if we see any more crazy diseases and these ones are coming back from ancient times, guys, I cannot take it. I'm not ready.
Yeah, we're going to have past, present, future all together up in this
Oh God,
bitch.
no, please.
It's going to be so much fun. But yeah, no, basically we can honestly stop this from happening. And what really needs to happen is the net zero thing. I know for most of us, it's like, it seems far enough away. Like we don't have to worry about the poles, what's happening. Like we have bigger issues in our lives.
Yeah.
But no matter where we live, like the everyday choices that we make, they do contribute in some small way to climate change. And it can collectively add up to a big impact on the world's coldest climes.
Yep.
Now, what we need to do is we need to really reduce our carbon footprint. We need to invest in energy efficient products and support climate friendly businesses. We need to support legislations and policies, even push for those by your government, so that we can actually help preserve the world's permafrost and avert a very vicious cycle of an ever warming planet.
Yeah.
Arctic sea ice would almost immediately stabilize, by the way, if we could like have our emission rates like magically next year. And then we would have like twice as long until the ice is gone. So like,
Yeah, but that's not gonna happen.
yeah, that's the bad news. We're not really doing anything like that. Like, I feel like we're just gonna like continue on this path that we've been seeing. And it's just gonna be a lot of ups and downs. But scientists do say that you might get to a point with an ice-free summer, maybe like in 2030 to 2040. And then through natural variability, you might recover for a decade. So it's just gonna be, like I said, a bunch of ups and downs.
Yeah, I 100% understand what you're saying.
So I know we talk a lot about like reducing greenhouse gas emissions and moving away from fossil fuel, all this net zero things, so that we can protect the ice from melting. But let's be real, these seem like really steep demands, right? Like, so do we have any other alternatives that we can use until we can step away from oil, or are we just doomed?
I don't want to say we're doomed, but guys, honestly, the biggest solution is we have to start sequestering or getting rid of more carbon than we're putting out. But there are some geoengineering solutions that are out there that people really argue over. Like, they really argue. But the three things that scientists are debating are the geoengineering big things are the blankets that have come out. The using glass beads is a thing. And then the other thing is, of course, the ocean walls and tunnels that they're hoping to use. Let's talk about those three things a little bit. So there's some suggestions about constructing enormous walls to prevent warm ocean water from eroding the glacier's ocean-facing edges. So what they would do is basically like they put these tunnels underneath and then they could pump cold brine into the glaciers. But it just sounds like really expensive to me. I don't know what to tell you. There's also like some other ideas, but they all entail this entire walls or tunnel situation. The geoengineering materials I talked about would be using the glass beads for reflectance, and there's studies in that area. This project called the Arctic Ice Project is using glass beads that have a high albedo, which means that it just is extremely good at reflecting sunlight, much more than the thinner and darker young ice that we usually have melt away. So that's basically the thing, right? Is these glass beads would have better reflectance. And I think it's cool and all. And there's, of course, the ones where they would use a reflective blanket. But I'm going to level with you guys. I'm very wary of adding materials to nature unless they're 100% biodegradable. And I say this as somebody whose research right now involves adding geomaterials to sand dunes. So yeah.
You're not alone in this. There's like so many other researchers, like you said, they are arguing over this because there are quite different schools of thought about this. So we'll see. With innovation, with technology, we might have gotten to a point where we can actually come up with an alternative solution. But I'll be honest, the glass bead thing, I mean, like she's now trying to see if like the person who created it, she's not trying to see if they're going to be dissolvable in water. Right. If they can, I think it might just be a real solution.
I agree with you. I agree 100%. If she can hack that, then I'm totally on board.
Do you remember like this news going around that was in 2021 that there were like record high levels of ice in the polar regions? So like how big of a myth was that? Let's be real.
That thing pissed me off so much. It was a huge, giant lie.
Girl, they had graphs and everything.
It was crazy the way they manipulated the data. This whole thing started when the Post claimed that Arctic sea ice volume was at the highest level recorded in 20 years. And it used data from the Danish Meteorological Institute that showed sea ice volume is now tracking above all recent years and may hit a 30-year record. This was wrong, misleading, false, a lie. Whatever, because sea ice fluctuates seasonally. So researchers monitor changes in ice cover or volume based on the time of the year. And they'll often use a reference that's called the ice's minimum extent, when sea ice reaches its smallest size after summer melting. In the Arctic, this usually happens in September. So what happened is the models showed ice volumes at the 2021 minimum extent was greater than in some past years, such as 2019 and 2020. However, the entire set of data for the year was still much smaller than levels seen in the early 2000s. So it was just twisting numbers and manipulating the graphs by leaving out much of the data. even the Danish Institute had to come out and be like, guys, this is a lie. I don't know who said this, but this is a lie. Please stop lying.
Well, I mean, good for the Institute to at least do that. What's the point? Like, I saw this I saw it, and it is such a comprehensive article. Why? Why would you put so much of your time and energy into lying? Like, bruh.
No, for real. And to be honest with you, I think this just goes back to the importance of science, literature, and critical thinking. Because at the end of the day, like, even as a scientist, when you take that data, you're taking the whole data. So if another scientist looks at it, they're going to confirm the same thing. But if somebody with no knowledge of how to analyze the data looks at it, they're just going to cherry pick stuff, and that's bullshit. But anyway, I guess that's pretty much it for all this Arctic stuff, or the Antarctic polar ice. Yeah, that's my takeaway.
And my takeaway is that nobody is safe from conflict, right? Like, let these resources on land run out, and these exploiters are already moving to the poles for these fossils. We ain't safe. It's quite messed up. So when we talk about these rankings, because we love to rank things, and since it's 2022 and we can't rank women anymore, we're gonna rank all these disasters. So where do we rank this?
Oh my God.
On a scale of 1 to apocalypse coming, Allah, what do you say?
Well, I hate being alarmist, so I'm not going to rank it at apocalypse yet. But it is like a solid 7.5 to an 8 as a real problem. Like, we will be alive when ice summers end in the Arctic region. It is highly unlikely based on the science, but really based on how shitty we've been so far, that we would recover things that we lose like this.
Honestly, I would say that sea caps melting is probably like the ultimate thing, right? That means that you've messed up the climate system so much in the rest of the world that even the ice caps, where nobody lives, where, like, especially Antarctica, there's no actual activity that's happening there, right? But it is the climate of the rest of the world that is affecting it. So I think, like, if they're gone, we might as well be hit by a small asteroid at that point.
Oh, please no, please no.
Yeah, let's hope not. Honestly, this is already creating like a disaster in so many parts of the world. There is billions and billions of dollars of destruction that we see around the planet. Just this year, the Tonga eruption that led to the tsunami, it was terrible and very horrifying to watch. And this is just going to keep getting worse. And don't let nobody tell you that volcanoes are not our problem. They are our problem. We can actually avert this issue. So here's my question to you guys. You know, as Ala explained these alternate solutions to us, do you guys think that these are actually viable solutions? Like Ala said, we don't want to put anything into the environment like that. But I think geoengineering might really be a solution. Do you think that we should try geoengineering in an ecosystem that happens to be so fragile? Because I think that we have developed effective technology at this point, right? Or do you guys think that this area should not be messed around with? It is far too fragile. It is far too important that we should not be doing experiments that may push us to doom even sooner. So please let us know what you think. An organization that we want to highlight today was founded in 1978. It is the Antarctic and Southern Ocean Coalition. It is the only non-governmental organization that is actually working full-time to preserve Antarctica and the surrounding Southern Ocean. The ASOC monitors all issues that impact the Antarctic, which includes climate change, tourism, fisheries management, there's biological prospecting, and even pirate fishing. Now, present campaigns, they include negotiation of this legally binding polar code that regulates all vessels that operate in the Antarctic. They established a representative network of marine reserves by 2012, which manages the Southern Ocean fisheries very sustainably. It regulates Antarctic tourism. It also helps monitoring the implementation of the environmental protocol to the Antarctic Treaty, which we already discussed. We will, of course, continue our discussion on the polar ice caps in our next episode by delving into ocean levels rising, the effects on water, and some more regulations in the Arctic that we did not get to discuss in this episode. You know, we promised that we're just trying to keep them short, just so you guys can get all the information that you need without having to spend billions of minutes on it. And we know we promised interviews, and we have some lined up for later episodes, but the polar ice episodes are just us. Check out our website, planetpolicypals.com, for updates and show notes, as well as references on everything that we talked about today. Email us, leave a voicemail, rate, and please, please, please do review us. Like, Allah's begging, not me. As you know, climate disasters are clearly something that we very dearly care about. So please let us know anything that you guys want to let us know Also, please let us know how soon do you think doomsday is. We would love to find out your opinion.
We're dying to know.
Follow us on Twitter at Planet Policy Pal, Instagram at Planet Policy Pals, and like our Facebook page. Check out our YouTube page if you need captions as you listen. Stay safe and dry, and until next time, keep learning, pals!